What is up, YouTube? We are back with another Getting Started video, your friendly guide to getting you going if you are a returning veteran to Path of Exile or if you've never played before. And today we're going to be talking about flasks. So what are flasks? What can they roll? What are their purposes? You may be following a build guide, or maybe you're making your own build. But regardless of whether you are choosing to make your own build or follow somebody else's build guide, flasks are going to be a key part of your play's consistency and your build's consistency as you are playing through both the story and the end game of Path of Exile. So what are flasks? Well, flasks are quite simply a temporary boost to specific stats, whether they are classic health flasks and they recover health, or they are classic mana flasks and they recover mana, or if they're a hybrid flask and they recover health and mana, or potentially they're a unique flask and they do something entirely different. So today we're just going to quickly go over some of the prefixes and suffixes that are important to flasks, as well as how you can sink some currency into your flasks to increase their duration. So let's take a look really quickly at flasks. A flask is simply a rechargeable potion. When used, the flask consumes a certain amount of flask charges and recovers a portion of life, mana, or grants temporary bonuses for the duration. Alright, so rather than simply read off a bunch of the different flasks, we're going to go directly to flask modifiers. So what can flasks do? On my setup right here, this is my level 90 gladiator that I'm playing right now in Incursion League. I've got 5 flasks. 2 of them are unique, and then 3 of them are regular flasks that you can simply find as you are farming. They're relatively common. So I've got a hybrid flask that gives me mana and life. I've got a jade flask that's going to give me flat evasion, and then I've got a quartz flask that gives me dodge for spell and dodge for attacks. And then they've also got some unique special abilities. These other unique flasks we're not going to talk as much about today because they're unique and particular to my build. They help me out with some block. So if you're not a block-based build, then you really don't care that much. But as we're looking at flasks, there's a couple of different things that flasks in their prefixes can do. So for the first couple of them, you can see that there are scaling abilities based on level. So depending on the level of the flask that you are using, that's going to determine what the range of rolls are on a flask. So if you have a regular flask and let's say you want it to upgrade to give you a particular ability, you need to check and see what the item level is. So this hallowed hybrid flask that we're looking at right here, its item level is 61, which is a little bit different than, let's say, where's my low level one? I think I sold a bunch of them earlier. Here we go. Then this Quicksilver flask, which is only item level 10. So you see the difference there in the item level. One of these is going to be able to have a much greater range of rolls and effects than the other, simply because of its item level. So you'll want to pay attention to that, and you're going to want to make sure that you're scaling or leveling your flasks as you continue to level. So a bunch of these prefixes are for life-based flask. You can see that a lot of these change recovery time, the recovery duration. So you can either extend your recovery duration and have a lot more amount of HP that's applied to you, or you can have a shorter duration, or maybe even an instant recovery, but you're going to have less total HP recovered over the time. So that's great, and that's actually what I've got right here on my hybrid, where I've got reduced amount recovered but then increased recovery rate. So it comes a little bit faster. The HP and the mana are going to come back a little bit faster, but the overall total amount of HP and mana that I actually get back is a little bit less. Now the suffixes on flasks are also incredibly important, and we'll go over exactly why these are important just right here. So on my setup, I've got a hybrid flask with immunity to freeze and chill. That's the suffix that's on it. That's incredibly important. So a lot of the time you can get frozen in Path of Exile, and if you're frozen, you can't do anything. So enemies are just free to whack away at you. But if you have a flask that grants you immunity to freeze and chill during the flask effect, even if you are frozen for a moment, as soon as you pop your flask, you are no longer frozen. So it essentially breaks you out of the ice. So it removes your freeze and chill on use, and then you're immune to it for the duration. So this flask only lasts 2.10 seconds, but that's enough for me to be immune to freeze and chill while I blow up whatever it is that's trying to freeze me. The next one that's incredibly important is removes bleeding. So if you've been leveling through the story mode, then you know that when you come to Act 3 and you fight Dominus, he has a bleed effect that will simply shred you when he's in his second form. If you've got a flask that removes bleeding while he's hitting you with his bleed ability, you can simply pop that flask and it's going to remove the bleeds that are applied to you right now, and it's going to give you immunity to bleeding while the flask is active. So this lasts 4 seconds. So for 4 seconds, you're simply immune to bleeding. So let's take a look at some of these other ones. So we've already talked about immunity to chill and freeze, but there's also essentially one flask for each status ailment. So there's immunity to ignite, immunity to bleeding. We've chatted about that. Immunity to shock, immunity to poison. And then there's also immunity to curses, which is awesome. So if you're going into an area and you know a boss or you know uniques in the area cast certain curses that really mess with your build, like let's say for instance there's a boss that's going to cast elemental weakness on you and you don't want your elemental resistances to be any less than 75 at the max. You can use a flask that has the of warding suffix, and you will not only have the curse removed once it's cast on you, but you'll also have immunity during the effect. So flasks are incredibly important. Okay, that's the thesis statement, all right, of this video. If you are leveling, or even if you're mapping and you're in the end game and you're wondering, hey, how can I improve my build? What are things that I can do to improve my build, to tweak my build? Checking in with your flasks, seeing if you've got any unique flasks that are on the market that would be helpful to your build. So for instance, I mentioned earlier, I'm using a unique granite flask that gives me increased chance to block. That's really, really helpful for my block gladiator build. I've also got an Adziri's Promise, an incredibly cheap, incredibly cheap. I think they're like 2 chaos, maybe even 1 chaos for an Adziri's Promise. And it just gives you a bunch of extra damage, and it's great. And it also gives you a little bit of life that you get to leech from the chaos damage that you're using while the flask is active. Now, lastly, in order to upgrade these, we're going to chat really quickly about the craftable item that can upgrade your flask. So a glassblower's bauble improves the quality of a flask. So let's take a look. One of the things that I could do to improve my build right now would be to improve the quality of my hybrid flask. It removes freeze. That's great. It's got the roll that I want on there. It's got reduced amount recovered but increased recovery rate. That's great. That's what I want. It's got 50% of the recovery applied instantly. That's great. That's what I want. But its duration is only 2.10 seconds. So let's go ahead and increase its quality, and you can see actually as we're increasing our quality here, the amount of life that we're getting and the amount of mana that we get back actually increases, which is great. So now rather than getting 800 life over 2.10 seconds, we're now getting 1,000 life over 2.10 seconds, which is great. I could improve my Jade Flask a little bit. I could improve my Phasing Flask. I could improve my Unique Flask. I could improve my Adziri's Promise. Anyway, so you can always use those Glassblowers baubles. So as you're finding them, as you're leveling, or maybe you just want to go out and spend some chaos in order to purchase some in order to make sure that your flasks are improved. The last thing that I'll say is that there is an ascendancy that is built all around flasks and their utility. That is the Pathfinder. It is a ranger, that's the base class, and then the ascendancy is the Pathfinder, and it gives you all sorts of wonderful bonuses to your flasks. So if you're considering a build that uses flasks and takes advantage of flask duration and flask effect, then you'll probably want to consider the Pathfinder build. For about 1.5 years, it was pretty much top meta build for any kind of speed clear, simply because your effects of your flask were buffed so greatly and the duration of your flask were buffed so greatly. Anyway, so hopefully if you've got any questions about flasks, or if you've got any questions about your build or how you can improve your flasks for your build, feel free to leave us a comment down below, and as always, stay tuned for more Path of Exile content.